Okay. As you see, most of these readings are actually pretty short. Be able to get through these relatively quickly. This first is a op-ed I wrote 22 years ago, 23 years ago. And still reflects, it's simplistic, but still reflects largely my own discovery. As I mentioned in the article, I graduated from BYU in 1978. There were 120 students in the CS program. I moved back to Provo in '85. The department found out and said, "Hey, would you like to come teach?" No, I only had a bachelor's degree. I was sort of flattered. These were mostly professors I had and I worked with, and I was thrilled they wanted me to come teach. And then I found out why. The department in those 7 years had grown to over 1,000 students. In fact, if you call up diagrams that show computer science enrollment and degrees, you'll find there's a peak in 1985, one in 2000, and we're sort of edging towards one now. The reason was, as far as I could tell, that by and large, a lot of students had been enamored of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and the success of Apple and Microsoft and thought they could all get rich becoming a software engineer. So we had, my first semester I taught 3 sections of 142 with a total of 700 students in it. So that was an interesting experience itself. But I was speaking one day with Gordon Stokes, who had been my faculty advisor when I was an undergrad. And we were talking about how much the program had grown. And Gordon said, you know, it's really funny. He says, we've gone from 120 to over 1,000 students. He says, as far as I can tell, we have about the same number of really, really outstanding students. So not the same percentage, the same actual number. So all the people who were naturally inclined and had talent were coming to see us on their own back in the 70s. Said they're still coming, but we have a whole lot of people who don't necessarily have a lot of aptitude or skill at this who are coming into it. There are inherent talents. We're going to talk more about how that breaks down. Inherent talents are attributes for IT, just as there are music, art, so on and so forth. I was in choir for 2.5 years in high school. Great choir. I only got in because Mrs. Pitkin, my honors geometry teacher, would not let me transfer to a regular geometry class to start with men's chorus. And she strong-armed the choir director into letting me in. And about a year later, I realized what a sacrifice that had been for Mr. Hubler, and particularly for Bruce Baumgartner, who sat next to me. He kept me out on an end with the basses with Bruce sitting next to me because they were screening me from the rest of the basses. And I loved choir. And when I came to BYU, I thought, I'm going to take some music theory. And I signed up for first semester, I signed up for music theory for non-music majors class and dropped it 2 weeks later. It's like, this just won't adhere to my brain. I mean, I scored 800 on level 2 math for the advanced test coming in. But music theory totally escaped me. I said, okay, I'm out of here. I still like to sing, but no, I don't play any instruments and I'm not good at music theory. The problem, the challenge that the industry faces is that the demand for IT engineers vastly outstrips the supply of people who are actually good at it. Now, usually at this point in the semester, I get students in the class looking panicked and saying, am I good enough? Do I have talent? And my answer is, you're seniors in a good computer science program. If you really didn't have some innate talent in this, you wouldn't be here. You would have washed out long ago. Yeah?
So does that mean that the number of people who are really good has grown because we're all here? Or
no, it means that there's a lot of people who have dropped out of the program in the last few years. Enrollment numbers are not as high as they used to be. And talent, as we'll see in the next article, talent isn't everything. It's not you have it, you don't. It's not a single talent. There's a range of talents, and there's a spectrum for the talent range. And if we had to rely on, if orchestras, if professional orchestras, had to rely on everyone in strings being Isak Perlman, you wouldn't have any professional orchestras. I have friends who are professional musicians, and actually they speak to me quite frankly about some of the levels of talent and skill among professional orchestras. If you made it this far, if you did not drop out of computer science, you're going to be fine within the constrictions of IT is a volatile industry. Yes?
So, this is an interesting point, but what's the takeaway for us as software developers? Because I guess I understand the point you're trying to make, but I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do about it.
Well, there's two things that you're going to take away, and this really gets back to the next article. This is a sort of a follow-up or a more expanded version. And this comes from many years of screening, of hiring software engineers, screening software engineers for consulting positions, so on and so forth. I have an acronym TEPES for Talent, Experience, Professionalism, Education, and Skills. And what you want, I mean, this is kind of like D&D, folks. It's kind of like, you decide where you put the points and what's there, and stuff you have in one category can make up for others. One of the inciting incidents I talk about, which you should know if you did the readings, is that when I was an undergrad and took 404, taught by Tad Norman, who was former department chair, and another professor. I literally need to go back and look at my notes. By the way, I saw them college notes. I don't know why, but they comfort me when I see them on the shelf. He team taught it with this gentleman who actually worked in industry and was taking a year off from industry to basically teach. And one day in class in 404, he said, we were talking about certification and qualifications and, should programmers be licensed or certified, things like that. And this other professor said, he said if you knew which ones to pick, you could go out among all the people working in data processing, as IT was called back then. Said you could take half of them outside and shoot them. And not only would no deadlines be missed, a lot of them would be advanced. And I remember sort of like, oh, that's cold. And then I graduated and started working out in industry and said, well, yeah, actually, he's right. It is, and if you talk to anyone who has had, and maybe some of you have had the experience, who has had to go through resumes to hire people, you see people who actually have good-looking resumes, and you get them in, and you start asking them questions, and you find out they really don't know what they're doing. Or they're not nearly as good as they think they are. And it becomes a challenge to know how to do this. Talent. Someone raised an issue on Slack of what's the difference between talent and skill. What I can tell you is that there have been studies that go back literally decades that show even when you control for programming language, experience, education, you can see if you give programmers a very specific, the same programming task, you can see a difference in productivity that ranges anywhere from 2 to 1 to 26 to 1. And what's really interesting is that the programmers who write code faster usually have fewer bugs, which is not what you tend to expect. I have known people who are truly gifted. Me, I'm sort of workmanlike. There's stuff I do well. I'm not fast, but give me time to think something through, and I come up with a pretty good architecture. So you've got talent. It's not a single talent. There's talents for architecture. There's talents for writing bug-free code. There's talents for debugging. I'm actually very good at debugging. At Pages, I found and closed more bugs than anyone else on the team as chief architect, because I knew the whole code base, and I lived in the whole code base. I would work through. I knew when I see a bug, I'd do this and say, well, this is supposed to be happening over here. And often the engineer who wrote here didn't know what was happening over here. It can be coming up with new algorithms. There are a variety of ones, and it's not a you have it or don't. It's back to D&D. It's like, you know, 3d6 roll, 3 to 18. Experience is extremely valuable. I've mentioned the year delay shipping pages. That was extremely painful. It taught me more about project management and estimation than any other single year in my professional life. It redirected my career. It turned me from a sunny optimist to a scowling pessimist. It's like, this is going to fail unless you do these things. And then it might fail anyway. And you know, John Goldberg, I've already quoted her, that only optimists build complex systems. Well, you know, I can tackle complex systems, but my approach isn't, let's build a complex system. It's like, let's build a really simple system and then evolve it into a complex system. Professionalism. I have on a couple occasions worked with or interviewed people who actually were very talented and had great experience and were pains in the butt. Prima donnas don't help. You know, I think of one experience with someone who was an extremely bright programmer on a particular team, but both his disdain and hostility for other team members and some of his own personal emotional issues finally led to him being fired because he was not contributing to the project. He was making things worse. Education. A question I see all the time, particularly in Quora. I answer questions on Quora from time to time. This is what it takes me. Sort of like, you know, is there any benefit for a software engineer in having a CS degree? And my general answer is yeah. One of the things I discovered when I graduated and started to work at General Dynamics was that I had a significant advantage over fellow programmers who didn't know what linked lists were, who didn't know about structured programming, who didn't know about flow of control, but who basically just kept hacking Fortran into increasingly complex knots. All things considered, education is better than no education, and it's now, we have a lot of our kids. I mean, it's probably, my wife and I were married previously. We have 9 kids between the two of us. Sort of a Brady Bunch thing, except we didn't have any together. It was all just hers and mine. Over half of them work in IT. And as I've gone into it, I've always said, here's the good thing and the bad thing. Bad thing is you're going to be learning for the rest of your life. I'm 65. I still study new stuff. I have to learn new stuff for the work I do. I use new programming languages. You know, I learn new techniques. Good news is people typically pay you more. They pay you to learn this and they pay you to get better. I have a son who works at a company where he's in a process. They're paying for him to get his Azure certification, and they will bump up his salary by a hefty chunk once he has it. So be prepared to spend the rest of your life learning, but you'll probably get good money for it. Skills, hone skills. Skills are important for a time-critical project. It's particularly important. But at Pages, for example, we were doing this on NextStep, which used Objective-C. Back then, no one used Objective-C. Literally, the NextStep operating system was pretty much the only place you saw it. Of all the developers that I hired, only one had prior Objective-C experience. But they were all very bright developers, and I trusted they could learn it and get very good at it. Again, only one of the same one who had Objective-C experience was the only one with prior NextStep development experience. So we all had to learn Objective-C, we all had to learn NextStep, yes?
Is it just a coincidence that Apple's word processor is called Pages?
No, it's not a coincidence because Steve Jobs always liked the name of our product. That was something he was very clear. I knew Steve Jobs. Though I'll say my last conversation was him calling me up from the back of the car to yell at me for another article I published in Byte that he felt was disparaging of Next. It was actually very, I thought, congratulatory of Next. But he was in the process of trying to sell next to Apple, and he was afraid this would somehow sabotage it. But no, Steve was always very clear that he really, really liked the name Pages. Now, our company closed in 95. Pages, the word processor, came out a full decade later. When it did, I had a lot of my friends and colleagues say, "My gosh, are they using the stuff you guys did?" And I said, no. They just like the name. So that's a relationship. No code there, and it would have been foolish to use the code because if we're talking 10 years later, I'm sure they had a lot of improvements. So these are the things I look for, and it's a combination of these. Someone who is highly skilled in a particular technology can be more valuable than someone who has great inherent talent. Ironically, the one that I'm probably most likely to initially strike someone for is professionalism. I know what it's like to spend years in a high-pressure environment with the development team. And as we'll talk about later on, the Pages team almost fell apart. Thankfully, Rick Gessner, one of the engineers, had some great insights into how to get us to better talk to each other, and then there was another technique we developed that we'll talk about in a future reading on that. Dead Sea effect. This is something I first noticed it when I was consulting at Fannie Mae back in the mid-90s. OSG was in there. We had about 20, 25 consultants. I was over all of them. But Fannie Mae obviously had their own in-house software engineers. Some were good, some were not so good. But I kept noticing over the 2 years I was there that the good ones were all sort of drifting away. A lot of them were going off to be consultants. But they were leaving. And the overall quality of the in-house IT group was steadily declining. I have since observed this in other organizations. Not all organizations. It depends upon how the organization treats its IT staff. But if they don't treat them well, you drive away the best developers because they're the ones with the most other opportunities and the ones least likely to put up with the crap that management will try to impose upon you. And what you end up with is a steadily declining overall level of quality. Yeah?
Why do you call, I guess, what we do IT?
Information technology?
Yeah, I
As
suspect
opposed to-
that most of us, I mean, we program and write software. I don't know if we necessarily categorize ourselves as IT. I was just wondering where that comes from.
Well, IT is a generic. It used to be called data processing. It's called IT because you'll end up doing a lot of different things, even as a software engineer. You'll end up evaluating products. You'll end up selecting and choosing hardware. You'll end up choosing software tools, even as a software engineer. There are things you'll have to understand about the systems you work on and the limitations. And a lot of these principles apply not just to software engineers, but other people working in information technology. Where you're talking about, I've done system administration, I've done network management. I've done, frankly, if you do it in IT, there's a good chance I've done it. I've done quality assurance. Those are all things I put under IT. Most of you probably haven't been out in the industry long enough to observe this. I'm curious if anyone has seen sort of this declining, seeing organizations where you've had the best people leave. I see a hand in the back there. Yes, you have.
Oh,
If you have details, you
yeah,
can.
so we had a few people that were being underutilized because they were well developed and there were some programs happening that didn't really enjoy as much, and so they had things to get to go to and be treated how they want to be treated. So.
Yep. Yeah.
So originally my internship was just setting up using Microsoft SharePoint sites, just drag and drop. And then one of the key developers knew that he wasn't going to get a big enough raise that he was wanting, so he switched teams to a different team, and all of his work ended up landing on me, which was awesome for me.
Yeah.
But, you know,
But there you go.
yeah.
Yes.
So my cousin-in-law, I can't remember if he dropped out of college, but he had some weird stuff going on with college, and my family was like super worried about him. He was married to my cousin and stuff like that, especially because they noticed that he kept on changing jobs, right? It wasn't he was getting fired, he was just moving jobs.
Yeah.
But then I started noticing that like every time he moved a job, he was making more money.
Oh, yeah.
And when I read this, it kind of clicked for me, like, oh, he's one of the reasons, because he talks to me about his job, and he's a really talented guy. And I was like, saw no reason why he wouldn't blend well with any specific group. And I was like, oh, maybe this is the reason.
I'm not recommending this, but let's see, I graduated in '78. By the end, let's see. By 1982, I was on my 4th job. 4 years. And there are various reasons for that. One was, this is the late 70s, inflation was running at 15% a year. Unless you were getting a 15% raise each year, you were making less money each year. And one of the only ways around that was to change jobs and bump your salary up each time. So I actually did. I went from, in those 4 years, I went from $16,000 a year to $26,000 a year. So that's pretty hefty. That's a 33% raise over 4 years, which I think was still falling behind inflation. So any more hands up? Yeah.
We had this guy that was just a great quality assurance tester on our team, and he told the company that he was even going to move somewhere else, and so they hired someone else to try and learn his job. But definitely, as soon as we left, the whole team felt it. Like when we say, "Hey, could you just write something to test this?" Like, oh, he doesn't even know what he's doing here yet. It's only been a few weeks.
And by the way, and we'll talk on this subject later under other circumstances, but at Pages, when we were in San Diego, one of my principal focuses was team stability, trying to keep people from leaving. And to that end, it wasn't big perks. I think most of Silicon Valley was, but it was small perks. We had a kitchen that had free soda and M&Ms. If 3 or more developers were working past 7 o'clock, we had a file folder up in our office manager's desk where they could order dinner and the company would pay for that. Minor stuff. John Curry, our CFO, from whom I learned a tremendous amount, even though he and I butted heads on many occasions, at certain points wanted to eliminate that as cost-cutting measures. And my argument was always, John, if I lose one engineer because you dropped the meals at night or the soda and M&Ms, I said, it will cost us in terms of time and delay in the product vastly more than you would spend in multiple years on all this. And so you have organizations that are frequently sort of penny-wise and pound-foolish. Okay, so let's talk about your organizations. Okay. Now that you all have team, let's call roll. And we have one person who's not on a team yet, Allison. So some of you may be contacted by Allison Bellows, who's looking for a team to join. Keep that in mind. I will call roll basically by teams. And this is what, as far as I can tell, based on what I looked at your wiki pages and so on, this is what the team assignments are if and.